This island spawns in the sky in the mid-game of every single Fortnite match. This season, it's called the Shogun's Arena, and at the start of the season, most pros thought it was kind of rubbish. The boss up here is a pain, and having to fight him is incredibly risky. More importantly, if there's more than one trio up here, then both teams just get into an incredibly messy fight with the Shogun X boss destroying all of their builds and completely griefing both teams' games. However, the team who won the island on the first day of the EU FNCS Grand Finals earned an average placement of 1.8. So clearly the best teams in the region understood these islands way more than everyone else. There are 7 possible spawn locations for the island. During the 12 games of the EU FNCS, 2 of these didn't actually spawn in a single game, and that's due to the way that the spawn is chosen. Now once the third zone closes and the fourth zone appears, the island will spawn in one of these 7 locations that is inside of the fourth zone. If we take a look at game 1 as an example, the third zone pulls down to the south. Since it'd be a bit pointless if the spawned all the way up in the north location and it was in Storm. This means that there are only 2 possible spawn locations that the island could be in, either near Mast Meadows or east of Canyon Crossing. And knowing this is a 50-50, Pixie, Vanya and Marius build this huge brick base up into the sky in this location. This means that when the island spawns, they can just use their Void Oni masks to safely teleport up and claim the island for themselves. Having a strategy to claim the island is so important because the only other way to get up there is to fly up the wind tunnels, and now the weapons no longer have bullet drop, it's very easy to die doing this. In this south pulling zone, this is by far one of the best positions in the game. Due to the zone, most of the teams will end up on the north side of this circle, so this island gives visibility onto a huge percentage of teams rotating in, allowing Marius, Pixie and Vanya to farm these teams for storm surge damage. Now, depending on which of the islands they actually stand on, they also have 360-degree vision onto the rest of the lobby, so unsurprisingly, they didn't struggle with storm surge much in this game. So why was it that the island didn't spawn in either of these other 2 locations? Well, for this spawn, there was just no fourth zones that even had it inside of it. And for the southwestern spawn, there were 3 games where it could have spawned, but it went Mast Meadows instead. So if the island always spawns inside of the fourth zone, what happened in game 2 where it didn't? Well, this third zone was particularly interesting. Because it pulls to the east of the map, there were 4 potential spawn locations, all on the outside of the third zone. But when the fourth zone appears, none of these spawn locations are actually inside of the safe circle. So how does it choose the correct spawn? Well, it would seem like the definition of needs to be in the fourth circle is kind of loose, as when the island spawns, it's clearly inside the safe circle. Not all of it, but some of it's in. This island position doesn't look as good as there's not a 360-degree coverage of players rotating past it to shoot, like in game 1. However, Mixon, Combek and Blaha can still rack up a ton of storm surge damage on the back of players who are rotating into the zone. They can then just wait in storm and use the large geyser here, which sends them incredibly high into the sky, to either rotate through the storm or into a great position in the next zone. Now, I haven't even spoken about the boss yet, Shogun X. He's a pain. Unfortunately, he's also invisible in replay mode, so from now on, any clips of him, he won't be there. He'll just be this exclamation mark. Now, Shogun's Arena is actually 5 islands. 1 main, where Shogun is located, and 4 surrounding it. When Mongrel, Mr. Savage and Panzer go up in game number 3, notice how none of them go near the main island. This is because landing on the island will activate the boss fight, and a contesting team is also flown up to the south, and if they start the fight, this team will third party them. So it's basically just a stalemate up on the island. Now, as long as no one shoots Shogun X or goes onto the main island, they just won't need to worry about this whatsoever. But there's this one rare chest up there, and Panzer just has to have it. Now, funnily enough, what I learned from this is that if you aggress the Shogun X boss and then leave the island, he's just going to start firing down at any team down below, griefing the entire lobby for around 60 seconds or so, which I thought was quite funny. Shogun X also doesn't take any damage from the storm, so when the next zone finally pulls back up to the island and Savage's team go back up there, he's still alive and continues to grief them and all their materials. Thankfully, they harvested enough earlier whilst on the island to be able to play height, which was easy for them to claim since they were already the highest in the lobby, and from there they won game number 3. Now, if you're actually able to eliminate Shogun X, you'll be gifted with his medallion, which we'll come back to later on, 2 big pots, a typhoon blade, and a mythic that everyone seems to have forgotten about, Shogun X's Fire Oni mask. Now, in order to understand why this is actually quite useful and why people have forgotten about it, I'll first have to kind of explain the entire storm surge meta in this tournament. Now, sitting on hills and in towers, for the most part, was not really that successful unless you're a storm surge trading. Let's take the south of the map as an example. There were 2 teams fighting in Seaport City, Queasy's team and Mumsy's team. However, there were also a lot of drop spots surrounding this that were uncontested, and these players need damage. So what they do is they rotate right into the fight in order to clean up and try to get some damage from these players who are weak. So you have iDrop's team who push north, Mixon's team who push west, and then Vanya's team who also push it north, and before you know it, there are 5 teams in this one very small area. The exact same thing in this game, game number 4, happens in the south of the map too, where 5 different teams are clustered close into this one small area, all trying to damage each other, all trying to third party. Now usually these mid-map hills here that Trulex, Chicho and Tayson have claimed are amazing for damage. They have massive sight lines over the entire center of the map, and that would be great if there was anyone rotating past here. But instead, they're all too busy clustered around the map in these other areas. So for Chicho in this scenario, sitting in a tower, he's just doing nothing. There's no one to shoot. There's no one around him. Now what Vino, Vico and Flixie do, who won this game, is that they take a fight at the edge of the map where other teams are not able to third party them, actually in the storm. And once they wipe them, they're good on their storm surge damage, because this is around 600, 700, 800 damage total. They can then just relax in the storm whilst everyone else is panicking for damage, and once the island spawns, they can simply just fly up. Now since no one else went up in this particular match, they wipe out the boss and grab the mythic Fire Oni mask. From here, we already know how good this island is for getting more storm surge damage because of these sight lines, and it's no surprise that when the storm surge threshold appears, they're over 1300 damage above. But they can now just spend the time to grief other teams down below by using the Fire Oni mask to destroy their boxes, wasting their materials and getting them focused by other teams who need storm surge. Even better, Vico also found a fire mask from loot up here, and they both spam them at the teams down below. So while many teams in the lobby have spent the entire game towered up, getting minimal damage, or clustered in some messy fights and are scuffed, Vino's team basically took a quick 3v3, played Storm, grabbed Island, and then ruined their day even more by griefing them with the Fire Oni mask. Even better for them, the Island was also in the 5th and 6th zones, so Vico, Veno, and Flixie were able to skip these rotations entirely. So since they managed to skip 2 rotations and already had completely capped mats from refarming up on the island, it was no surprise that they were easily able to win this game. So for the first 4 games, it seems relatively random who was able to claim the island. That is, until you start actually comparing their drop spots. In game 1, it spawned to the south, and this was claimed by Vanya, Marius, and Pixie. And these guys drop at Kappa Kappa Factory, unsurprisingly close by. Mixon's team, who claimed it in game 2, lands also close by at Shattered Span. Mr. Savage's team land at Bird for game 3, which isn't that far, and Vino's team land at Flooded Frogs, also not that far from the spawn. Now if I was to tell you that in games 5 and 6 the island spawned to the south here, would you be able to guess who claimed it? That's right, Vanya, Marius, and Pixie. And remember, on this first day, out of these 6 games, the average placement of teams who won the island was 1.8. So clearly, the strategy of focusing heavily on island was incredibly powerful. Now, with 3 of the 6 games playing from the island on day 1, it's no surprise that Vanya's team were at the top of the leaderboard. However, what if the zones just don't pull south? Well, here's what the 4th zones looked like on day number 2. Let's specifically look at game 7, where the zone pulled north. Vanya's team got into a fight early in the game and lost a few members, meaning they had to reboot in the storm at Shattered Span. From this position, there's just literally no way they're going to be able to rotate fast enough to get to the northern spawn, especially when Vico, Vino, and Flixie, who drop right next to this area, have already boxed up where the wind tunnel spawns and are ready to fly up onto the island. The exception to the rule here is of course Queasy's team, who were able to win the island in both games 8 and 9. Now from their drop at Seaport City, you may think that it would be one of the east spawns that they were able to capture since they're close, but this actually was not the case, as it was the northwestern spawn, the furthest possible island from their drop, that they were able to get in both of these games. It turns out the mess of spawn I described earlier at Seaport benefited them in some games. In these 2 games, game 8 and 9, they were able to get some quick damage on the contesting team, quickly loot, and then use their mobility in the mid-game to make an early push towards a position where the island may spawn. This obviously worked in their favor, as they were able to be the first team up there twice in a row. So after game 9, the top of the leaderboard was kind of telling. 3 of the top 4 teams were very focused on using the island as part of their strategy, but interestingly, none of them played it in the final 3 games, leading to an incredibly close finish. This was either due to the teams getting early storm surge damage and choosing to play the dead side of the zone, or in Queasy's case, play the storm, or just because they had lost a player in a fight and physically couldn't set up to get the island in time. This actually meant that the worst performing teams were able to claim it, and they all completely ruined the average placement stats I had lined up for this video. Now I think you get the point. The mid-game advantages of this island are really strong, but there's also Shogun X's Medallion that you get from beating the boss. Now the Shogun X's Medallion gives you infinite stamina, so you can infinitely sprint, but it also makes you almost completely invisible when you are sprinting. It's funny because in Chapter 4, when Mysterio's Medallion was in the game, which made you invisible when you crouched instead of when you sprinted, people were dropping this and not even carrying it because they thought it was just bad. People felt like the trade-off of being visible on the map when carrying it just wasn't worth it. Ironically, a lot of people realized towards the end of the season that you could quite literally just crouch your way through the entire end game, barely building, and get a ton of points in tournaments. So as the season went on, more and more people started to put this as part of their solo cash cup strategies. Similar to that Medallion, a lot of people have been hyping up how good Shogun X's Medallion really is. But was it actually that good in the grand finals? Well, in 5 of the 12 games in EU, the Medallion managed to gain some points for a team where they otherwise would not have had them. In Game 4, Vino was able to 1v3 Pixie, Vanya, and Marius in order to win the game, gaining his team an additional 23 points. Now, they still absolutely could have won this, but the invisibility definitely helped him eliminate Pixie. In Game 5, the biggest use of this coin was made by Yarko, who solo clutched from 10th place all the way up to a top 3 by basically running in circles with builds above him. Now, this gained him an additional 28 points. Interestingly, if you remove these points, they would have ended up 15th rather than in 10th, which would have cut their prize money in half. In Game 6, Pixie is able to eliminate Swizzy whilst invisible. Again, he probably could have done this without the coin, but this did give him an additional 8 points. In Game 8, Moustache is able to clutch up a few placements, and in Game 9, Atom is able to get 1 single placement threshold as well. Now, if you just remove all of these teams' points from the leaderboards, which I know does not mathematically make sense, because other teams would have done well had they not survived as long and blah 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 blah, but just as a thought experiment, the leaderboards don't actually change whatsoever. Vino still wins, Vanya's team still comes second, the rest of the leaderboard is pretty much exactly the same. That is outside of Yarko's team. Whilst I was gathering this data, I also had Peterbot's solo clutches in mind as well, because when I watched NA, he went off the charts with this coin. But did the coin actually really do that much? Well, if you watched closely in games 2 and 11, his 2 biggest solo clutches, he wasn't just running around in circles hoping he wasn't getting shot, he was just playing his usual playstyle. At one point, he even pressures Poyo's team, who is a full trio, off of his lair and out damages them, and the invisibility coin had zero to do with that. Now, the only example I saw in these 2 endgames where the Medallion actually made a difference was where Sphinx didn't see him in this situation here, which allows him to take height. Outside of that, Peterbot just played like the greatest player of all time. Now, it's not that the Medallion is bad, but from this grand finals, specifically on EU, the positioning and rotational advantages that the teams got from the actual island itself seem to be way more beneficial than the invisibility from the Medallion. Now, all of the strategies discussed in this video heavily revolved around Storm Surge, and you can click on this video right here to learn why it's Fortnite's most confusing mechanic.